Welcome, everyone. This is Teresa Faust. I am moderating our August webinar for the Religion Communicators Council. It's also known as the RCC. I am a past president of the Religion Communicators Council, stepping in for our current president, Ryan Coe, who is unavailable. It's a pleasure to do this, and I wanted to open with our mission statement. We always do this to kind of ground ourselves in why we're here and what we do. So the mission statement for the Religion Communicators Council is that we are a professional association that provides opportunities for networking and professional development for communicators of faith-based organizations. I apologize. I have a little typo in my notes here. We're also interested in advancing religious literacy. So one of our monthly webinars are opportunities for educational opportunities and professional development. What we try to do before we jump into the topic, particularly if we have a small group, is to take a moment for brief introductions. And by brief, I do mean very brief. But I think this is helpful for those of us that are present. It's also helpful for the presenter so they know who their audience is. So to give you a sample of brief, I will go first. I already told you, my name is Teresa Faust. I'm the past president of the Religion Communicators Council. I was a research manager at United Methodist Communications, the communications agency for the United Methodist Church, which is a global church. And I did research, and we researched communications, lots of different audiences. I'm currently working for an organization that evaluates campaigns. And that means lots of different channels, lots of different types of content. It's fascinating. I'm in Ohio, and I'm going to say that's it for me so far. I'm going to turn it over to Addie Lisby for a quick intro. Addie?
All right. Addie Lisby. I am Addie Lisby. I'm the past secretary for the executive board of RCC. I am the former editor of the Star of Zion religious newspaper for the AME Zion Church. I've launched out a publication called Turn News. I was also their first chief communications officer. So this is very interesting about aging communities. I can't wait to hear what is going to be offered.
Thank you, Addie. And Anudama.
My name is Anudama Das. I'm based in Washington, D.C. I'm the Global Minister of Communications for the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, or ISKCON, a Vaishnava or monotheistic Hindu tradition. And I'm really excited because I've never had a webinar that was all about me before. So thank you.
All right. And Jenny, quick intro, please.
Sure. Hi, Larry. Jenny Heiser. I'm the executive director for RCC, and I am based just west of Cincinnati over the state line.
All righty. So our speaker is Larry Guengerich, and he's going to speak about the topic that's on your screen right now. I'm going to let him do a quick intro of himself. It was all in your invitation, but I think it would be helpful if he would do an intro, and I will turn it over to you now, Larry. Welcome and thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad to be here. I enjoy sharing my learnings and kind of where our organization is and what we are seeing, particularly as it relates to an aging population across the board in the United States, but intentionally within communities of faith, and how does that in reality impact communities of faith? A little bit about myself. I was born in Aspen, Colorado. Not many people can claim that, but when I was born in 1967, folks from the Mennonite Christian tradition were running hospitals in underserved areas of Western Colorado. And my parents were working at a hospital in Aspen. So that's where I was born. Most of my youth was in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So I do love winter in all its forms, and especially this time of the year. But I've lived in Lancaster, Pennsylvania for the last 30 years, where I currently live with my spouse, and we have two children, taking one off to college for the first time on Friday, and then one that's a sophomore. My background started in international development. Have an undergrad degree in international development, but all the time I was working toward that degree, I was working in sports journalism at my two colleges that I attended, leading up to being the sports information director at a small Division III school. And so that kind of moved me from the international development work to more communications and marketing. And then that led me to a job or several jobs within Mennonite Central Committee, which takes part in RCC work. I was at several RCC events, and as I mentioned here on the slide, even was a part of a team that won an award in 2007 for the magazine that is still produced by Mennonite Central Committee. That was a key part of understanding and beginning to look at how aging was affecting constituent groups and ways to work at that. And then in 2011, I moved to what was then called Landis Homes. As you can see from my background, we're now Landis Communities. We were a single site traditional retirement community, your typical model where you pay to come in. It appeals to the folks who have in the top 20% of assets. And we were on the verge of changing into much more of a organization that was expanding services to meet aging folks wherever they were. So just to give you a sense of that, I wanted to lay out sort of our organization's history. You can see on the left of the chart in 1964, Landis Homes started with 9 residents, primarily as a place for folks within Mennonite community who had served in international assignments and came home as they retired with nowhere to live, but rapidly grew from that. We began to do some services to the larger community in the late 80s and through the early 2000s. But then really in the last years since 2013, in the last 10 years, we have dramatically expanded into serving low-income seniors, serving seniors with intellectual disabilities and dementia, and then serving what we call middle market rentals, people who are in age 55 plus who may not want to do upkeep on a house or may not want the size of a house. And so we have over 100 apartments in downtown Lancaster, Pennsylvania, that we rent for those. And as we grew, we wanted to keep in mind from our faith tradition, from the Mennonite faith tradition, why we were involved with folks who were aging. So some of the examples I will give will be from our tradition, but almost all of the statistics I have looked at, without regard to faith tradition, this would hold true. This is not a particularly Anabaptist thing or a Mennonite thing or a Christian thing. This is a truth across the United States as a whole, primarily. But we do focus a bit out of our own tradition, particularly the last part of this statement from the folks, from the person with whom Mennonites are most closely connected, Menno Simons. He said, whoever boasts that he or she is a Christian, the same must walk as Christ walked. And where that came into play as it relates to aging and mental health facilities was that during several of the large conflict times in American history, particularly World War I and World War II, Mennonites who had beliefs against going to war were able to work in mental institutions and other places and came back from those experiences and said, we can do better. This is not right. If you're familiar with the history, there were state and local asylums where people were just warehoused. And so that led to a growth in our small faith community of a pretty large network of people working within the senior world. And that has led to some things that we are learning along the way. But then in about 2008, our board heard very strongly, hey, yes, we know all about the boomers, but there's some larger things at work here, and we need to have you investigate these things and come up with new models for aging. And so we've really been leaning into that in the last number of years. And I'll talk a little bit about that as we go forward. But I think it's really important to show some of the statistics. And when I share with faith communities around this area, I sometimes say I'm not trying to scare you with these statistics, but it sometimes does have that effect, because no matter how much people are thinking about things, they don't often maybe see it, put it as starkly. So I wanted to start with this. It says that as of now, in essence, there are about 5 states, Maine, Florida, New Hampshire, Vermont, and Delaware, who have nearly a quarter of their population being older adults. So above the age of 65, 1 out of every 4 residents of those states are already at that age. That has huge ramifications for how folks in that area are served and how they are able to live out their lives as they are wanting to, especially when you look at small states like Delaware. If you're already at almost 25%, who is taking care of those folks? Who is serving those folks? What are communities of faith able to step in and do, and what things are they not able to step in? So this just kind of gives an idea of looking at these states. You can kind of get a sense for where some of this is going to hit with folks above 65. But I was telling Jenny earlier, I used to talk about the statistic that every day 10,000 people in the US turned 65. And I've quit using that statistic just because I don't even think that's helpful anymore, because it isn't the people who are turning 65 that the congregations and the faith communities that we are working with, I think they should be thinking about. Where I think we need to be thinking about as the folks 80 plus. And I'll go through a few slides to kind of show why that is. So if you look at this chart, you can see the red dotted line shows where we are at right now and the projected 80 plus millions. So we've just kind of crossed the 15 million mark. But just in the years between now and 2045, we are going to see an incredible rise in the amount of people who are 80 or better. And what we learn is that as people age, particularly as they near the 80-year-old mark, it is almost a certainty that they will experience something that will limit their connectivity with their community of faith, if they have one. And so that's why I say, rather than using the age 65, let's start to think about 80. What does it look like for faith communities to be thinking through having a population that is rapidly going, in the next 20 years, going to be turning 80? And so I look at that, but I then compare it to this chart. So this chart is the caregiver support ratio in the United States. That is what looks at the difference between the people who are 80 plus and the people that are 45 to 64. Now, Teresa, I would never ask anyone, much less you, what your age is, but you said you were a sandwich generation person. So I'm going to assume that broadly you fit into the 40 to 60-year-old age group. And so that's what's tracking on this blue line. And you can see that here in 2025, just as our previous chart starts to go up, the caregiver ratio is going down precipitously. That means that there are less people to care for more people. The way that you can think about this is right now, as you look at that red line, people on average, and everything is averages, right? You will know people that fit this average and you will know people that don't fit this average. But the average person has about 7 persons that they think they could call on if they were in a pinch to do something for them. They might be a child, it might be a grandchild, it might be a neighbor, it might be someone from the faith community, it might be someone else. But they have about 7 people who could help them with something. When we get out here to 2045, 2050, it's looking to drop to about 3 as an average. That becomes problematic for a whole host of things, but let's keep it in the faith tradition. How do faith traditions deal with or work with a rapidly aging congregation or faith community when there are less and less people who are able to walk alongside them? This doesn't get into the finances of that at all. This is specifically people. And for my purposes here, I want to look at this as a people issue. There's a whole nother conversation that could be had about what's happening with the finances for aging. I'm not going to take that on today. That's not my goal. My goal is to talk about it from a people perspective and a community of faith perspective. But there seems to be a couple of things driving this. Excuse me. There seems to be a couple of things driving this. And I ask that broadly in this question: to whom and to where are faith groups? And I hate using the word marketing when we're talking about faith traditions, right? But let's be honest, as communicators, this is what we are doing. We are marketing. And I am still seeing in many, many sectors of the faith community, regardless of the kind of religion, regardless of if it is a large group or a small group, I am seeing a lot of folks saying we're marketing to those single family households, 2 kids, and that's who we see as our target market. You know, we're advertising our children's programming, we're advertising our vacation faith document events, we're advertising all kinds of stuff, but it is aimed, the music, the everything is aimed around getting these folks in the door. And while that may be where your faith community is, it is not the reality in many cases, particularly for faith communities that are located in suburbs. Suburbs are an outgrowth of World War II. Many of you would know that story as well, if not better than I, where people returning from the war had an opportunity to buy houses relatively inexpensively, and lots of suburbs were built. The suburb I live in was built in 1964. But the reality is, this is who is not being marketed to. Folks who lived in their suburban house for 40, maybe 50 years, it's sold off, it has paid off. It is where they intend to live as long as they possibly can live, but they see their world shrinking in some really dramatic ways. I use my subdivision as an example. There's no sidewalks in my subdivision. There's no stores within walking distance. There's no transportation system that comes into the cul-de-sac. If you want to get the bus, you have to go a mile to get a bus that would take you to a grocery store. Um, you are entirely car dependent. And I walked with a couple of congregations as they noticed that the areas around their faith community building were changing. And I had two examples. Pastor came to me and said, I don't know what I'm going to do. I have a small congregation, and I spent more time in the Office of Aging this week advocating for my members than I did working on my homily. He said, I can do that when I have one or two. I've got 3 or 4 more coming who do not have communities and people around them to help them. Their families, if they have them, are geographically distant, and they need help from the local community. And that's what I, as a pastor, as a faith community leader, am spending my time doing. I had another congregation that I was working with who had been very fortunate to build an activity center gym. And they said, we have open gyms, we do all this stuff, and we get 4 or 5 kids. But they then thought to themselves to do a survey of their local community within 4 blocks of all sides of the house of worship. And what they discovered was the average age was over 70. And so what they did was they figured out, okay, we have this space. What are we going to do with it? And so I'll talk a little bit about that as we go down the road, but it became a way to, again, I don't like using the word, but to market their congregation, to market their faith community to the people who actually live around there, as opposed to some sort of a stylized ideal of who you want to get as new folks to participate in your house of worship. So I wanted to talk a little bit just about what can be done. One is strengthening the connections we already have. Some of your faith communities do have things for seniors, and working to develop those networks is one way to do that. Another is to offer from your house of worship social services or activities aimed at this group. One is to offer care and emotional support. I'm aware of one group who has a nurse as a member of the congregation, and that nurse offers services at pointing people toward the appropriate care navigation pathway so that people who live in the community know they can go ask this nurse a question, and she won't answer it. She's not going to go outside the scope of her license, but she can point them in the right direction. And sometimes that's all they need. But the biggest thing of what can be done is collaborate. And that is finding partners to do things that help the folks who are aging, both already in your faith community and or in the community surrounding your building. Collaborate with businesses, collaborate with other nonprofits, collaborate with anybody that you think can make a difference in the life of the community. The congregation that I attend, the Mennonite church that I attend, we've collaborated with a nonprofit that does faith-based art creation. They use our space. People from our congregation and other surrounding places can come and create art. Something to do. It's an activity. It is something to combat loneliness. And we'll talk a little bit about that just in a bit in terms of some of the statistics around loneliness and how that really makes a difference for people. 90% of people tell researchers that they want to age in the home where they live currently. 9 out of 10 people say that's where they want to live. Only about 15% of people actually make a plan to make that possible. The rest are reacting to changes that happen, as they occur. The example I always give is from my neighborhood. When spring comes and the garage doors come up, every year I see a few more washer and dryers are put into the garages instead of in the basements. Why? Because that elderly person or couple can no longer go up and down the stairs safely to do their laundry. And so the laundry gets moved up to the garage. They didn't plan how that was going to work. They just lived with that reality. So there's not a lot of planning. And a third of 70-year-olds and more than half of 80-year-olds have some sort of limitation on what they are able to do to care for themselves. So a third of people who are 70, over half of the people who are 80 need help with something. And if it seems like there's more folks in those age groups, it's not an accident. Just in the past 10 years, we've seen a 44% increase of people who turned age 65. And so we are living this growth of people between 65 and 80 that for the next 20 to 25 years are going to dramatically affect faith communities. And the ones that can do these things that you see on your screen, strengthen existing connections, provide social services where appropriate, give care and emotional support, and collaborate well, are going to be the ones who can meet the needs that their community has. There are a number of creative models for folks aging in place that communities of faith could be involved with. One is a village model where people pay a membership fee and then they're given access to different services in their community. For example, a church could be that umbrella partner, and then when someone needs their gutters cleaned, there would be a one-call number where the person would call in and say, hey, I need my gutters cleaned. The church would take that small monthly payment, and that would be used then to pay for staff or pay for partners in the commercial side to go and actually help a person. We as a nonprofit organization have done that with several organizations. We have an HVAC supplier who we work with. So when we're in a home helping someone and we see them going up and down the stairs unsafely, we then work with that provider so that they can get their laundry facilities moved or a grab bar put in by a professional, not just, you know, your cousin's nephew who throws a couple screws into drywall and thinks it's going to hold a 200-pound person as they pull on a shower rod. And then we've even seen where communities of faith say, okay, this person is not safe in their home anymore. They need to be at a higher level of care. But we know that this person can only do what they have in Social Security in terms of payment. But we know that that isn't the full cost of care. And so this faith community has committed to, when their members need to do that, the faith community picks up the difference between what that person can afford to pay for care and what the full cost of care is. That's a very creative idea of how faith communities can help people age safely and in the appropriate level of care. One of the most underused resources that I'm seeing is our buildings. Buildings are for using, but one of the big problems is accessibility. I'll use my parents as an example. They wanted to change congregations in their mid-80s. When they went out to look for congregations, one that they loved the community they found, but it was 10 steps up into the sanctuary. Now there was an elevator, but my parents were like, that's for the old people. Even though they're in their mid-80s, that was for the old people. What they wanted and where they ended up attending was a place where there are no steps. So the accessibility issue becomes critical for folks in this. I know a group who flip-flopped their situation. They put what had been a fellowship hall into their sanctuary because that everyone could walk in the door. And upstairs that used to be a sanctuary became a fellowship hall because that met the needs of the group that was meeting there better. Again, making sure that buildings are comfortable and safe, thinking about transportation, is that something that you can offer? Is it something that you can pay for and maybe help people who feel their world is shrinking because they don't have the ability to drive anymore? And then the integration of tech. I think that's one big way that we can use our buildings better, is providing hearing systems for folks who are aging in ways that help them to be able to continue to stay part of the life of their faith community. I was talking to a woman recently who said, I go to church, but honestly, I don't get anything out of it because I have no idea what they're saying. It's too loud. I just can't hear them. And so she goes because she wants to be present, but she cannot hear because the way that the sound system is set up is just overwhelming to her. She has to take her hearing devices out, and then she can't understand what's happening. So finding appropriate ways to do that, I think, are really important, even if that means staffing differently or using different technologies. There are some interesting technologies out there, these loop systems that you can use where you can, have people be able to hear appropriately. I've heard of congregations and other faith communities doing services at a different time, at a different volume. So, if you go to the service that's at 10 o'clock, you're going to have a different level of music. You're going to have a different level of speaking. And that's one way to again, provide in this building. And then just using it well. I know a house of worship that tore out all its old, beautiful benches and put in chairs. And they first had a number of people just could hardly wrap their head around the fact that this beautiful place of worship had been gutted, in their words. But then they were able to put in chairs that allowed them to pick up the chairs after their services were done and have that same space be used as a senior center 5 days a week. Not in a gym floor, not where they had to try to make something fit, but this was actually their main worship space, cleaned out, put in the right kind of carpet, put in the right kind of sounds so that it could serve as a senior center for 5 days a week rather than sitting empty. Just a really creative way of doing that. I think some of these things will only change when the demographic shifts get so bad or so intense that we have to change. We aren't incentivized to change sometimes. We think it's going to cost too much money. We think it is going to provide for people who probably were going to show up anyway. And, changing attendance patterns. We notice here at our retirement community that people are much more willing to stay home on Sunday morning in our tradition and watch on a TV where they can control the volume and they can control the seats and they can control the temperature than they are to go to a church. And so how do you keep people involved in faith communities when changing attendance patterns or such, even for this age group? And then, as I mentioned, segmented programming, particularly aiming programming at that age group, being very intentional about having programming for seniors. My boss, she was telling me that her parents had changed worship places 3 times, and each time they've started up a 65 plus group that thrives long after they have moved, because that was something that didn't exist. There was plenty of activities for young people, but there wasn't anything specific for folks who were 65 plus. So I talked a little bit about this example of a sanctuary space into a weekday senior center. I'm also aware of congregations or other houses of worship who are doing transportation services, not only to their own service, but to appointments and things like that. I will point out that that does come with some legal ramifications that should be investigated before you just start giving rides. that can have some impacts. Another trend that I see beginning is in building senior-friendly housing on church property or on faith community property. There are a number of places that have said, we bought these 20 acres anticipating a building project. Following COVID, we just don't think this is the direction we're going. We're going to keep the building that we have that's paid off. Now we don't know what to do with these 10 acres or what to do with these 15 acres. And there are a number of places that have built senior-friendly housing on the church property or on the faith community property so that they can serve people, not just from their own faith community, but from the larger community. I think that's just a really creative use of space. And then another more urban setting where a congregation, I believe it's in the Washington, D.C., on the Maryland side, where they built housing above the sanctuary. They put layers above that so that people could live there because they realized that it was cheaper for them to build in that way than it was to buy land and create housing. And they had a real sense of mission around providing housing for lower income folks in their community. And then I think integrating intergenerational ministries is something that can help. I have a kid who's ready to go off to college, who doesn't live anywhere close to any of his, or when he's in school, won't live close to any of his grandparents. What kind of models can communities of faith have that might help people create intergenerational living opportunities? We have a few of those in this area. We have one retirement community that has connected with a college that is just 2 miles down the road from them. And they had some extra rooms and the college was bursting at the seams. And so they've worked out a system where college students can live in a retirement community. I did that even 30 years ago. I was working for the school, the university, needed a relatively inexpensive place to live. The senior center or the senior retirement community needed someone to be an on-call on weekends where you would put the mail into boxes and sell lunch tickets and be present to let the ambulance crew in if somebody needed help, and in exchange for low rent. And that was a very formative experience for me to get to meet people because I also did not grow up near my grandparents. And as our genealogical systems change to having dispersed families by generations often, this intergenerational connectivity, I think, is something that we can all look at. I think I'll just give one or two more examples and then open it up and see if this has jogged any thinking in your minds. One of the creative things that we have done is find an app for a smartphone that can very easily run live television. And what we do with that is provide that as a service to people who can no longer go to their community of faith. And so they can open up on their iPad or on their smartphone. And even if you look at the aging population now, if you look at 65 to 70-year-olds, a huge percentage of them at least have a smartphone, whether they're using it to its full potential or not. You aren't going to get everybody that way, but it is a tool that can be used by communicators to connect with folks in this age group in ways that they haven't done. And then the final thing I would mention is just being a listener. One of the big things for our organization was when we took time in 2008 to stop, not just look at expanding our existing retirement community, but to stop and listen to what the folks in the community were saying, not only about us, but just about where did they want to live. Where did they want to be able to walk to from their um, accommodations? And it gave us the chance to think of new creative things. And so one of the things that we did was now we have created over 100 middle market rental apartments in downtown Lancaster for people where places have a walk score of 99 out of 100. You know, they can literally walk out the elevator, around the corner, and be in a grocery store within 50 feet. They can walk to restaurants. They can walk to farmers markets. They can go biking. They can get it. There's a bus stop right outside their door. But it is intended for middle markets. This isn't the gleaming, the gleaming 40-story buildings. These are for people who are able to be in, they were professional firefighters. They were teachers. They were, in some cases, 4 persons in a factory. So they don't have huge asset bases to come to a retirement community, but they certainly have enough money to pay their rent. And how we work together to grow those communities to be more than just a place to live, but to be a community. So that's one of the examples that we're trying to do. If you ever want to look them up, one is called Steeple View Lofts, and it's located in Lancaster. It's an old converted tobacco warehouse, 3 stories of apartments above retail. And then the newest one is called Landis Place on King, and that's 79 apartments above retail space. Both right in the downtown core of Lancaster, which has a really high reputation as a place to live for folks who want to age in place, and is on the WHO's age-friendly city list. And so very much is taking that seriously. So I hope I've at least given some things to think about. I think I will just briefly go back. I wanted to show you just one more, take one more look at that slide. Here's where we're at, with boomers turning 80, just starting. We're going to go from just over 15 million to almost 35 million if we take it out to 2050. About 32 million if you want to take it out to 2045, so the next 20 years. And then looking at the care ratio and where that is, and are we as faith communities going to have to speak into that in some new ways as models are being turned on their heads here in this country in terms of workforce and things like that. So maybe I'll stop there. I'll quit sharing my screen. And we can have a conversation. So I can take a drink, and you can ask any questions. And yeah, I see the comments about lighting, about offering large programs. We in my place of worship, we always do our program or our the words for things that are being sung or read are always on dark backgrounds with light letters and sans serif and large. And we also make sure that the lighting in the room, in the space, is such so that people who may have low vision are able to continue to take part in the activity. So what do we got? Well, hopefully that was helpful.
Larry, I have a question. You had mentioned this before. It's kind of this self-identification of I'm not a senior or super senior. And I've seen that at my dad when he was in a nursing home facility. I'm not that old, right? Do you see a difference in how we would reach out or try and engage like the younger seniors to the super seniors to the maybe?
So one of the things we've done, and this takes it out of the faith community per se, but it has been relatively successful, is we make our ads look like they're aimed at Teresa, but they're actually aimed at her parents. So we will say, is your loved one could your loved one maybe use a little bit of help? Could your loved one maybe benefit from not having to do the laundry? When we're talking about some of our in-home care services, we know that, yes, we want Teresa to see that. Sorry, I'm picking on you, Teresa, but you, we want those people, the children, to see that. But we also know that people who are old enough and who may want some of those services find it easier to respond to something that it looks like it may be for somebody younger than them. That's one of the things that we've learned along the way.
Thank you. That makes sense. Yeah.
That is fascinating learning that you learned along the way. As far as, reaching the right people with the message and the content. I'm going to go ahead and I was just going to start pontificating. I'm going to let Anudama ask his question. Go for it.
Teresa, you're not allowed to pontificate yet because Larry said you're in the younger age group, so you have to wait a few more years.
Got you all fooled.
Larry, I live in suburban Washington, D.C., and of course, everything here is politics.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, you didn't talk about, what at least they seem to talk about here, the perception, Social Security money is going to run out in 2030. You didn't really emphasize that as this is how bad it is if there's still Social Security money. But, if they cut some of that, etc. So I don't know if that's just a can of worms, or you don't think about that because it's such a conflicted topic these days, or what are your reflections on that, if any?
Yeah, I think senior providers are caught in a pretty tight vice between, in many cases, faith communities being as divided as anybody else. And if we become too activist in advocating to not make cuts, we hear negative repercussions. And if we aren't active enough, we hear negative repercussions. Our organization has chosen to send notes to legislative leaders just pointing out facts. This is how this will affect this community. One of our personal care standalone places almost exclusively works with folks who either just pay their SSI or who have significant intellectual disabilities and are not yet 65 but have some sort of a way of paying. And to drop that in any way would really put at risk the whole bit. We've talked to some legislators and to some community members about how expensive it is to do low-income senior housing. And we've done that very explicitly, saying it costs almost the same to build a middle-income building as it does to build a building for low-income seniors. And if we change, one of the things that was just cut was what's called home funds, capital HOME. It was a federal dollars that were distributed by local authorities to help fill the gap so that lower income housing could be built. And that's been done away with. It is really hard for us to talk too loudly about that because there are still other federal dollars that we really want to get and are trying to get. And we are worried that if we are too loud, we as an organization may put at risk some of the other things that we're doing that will allow people to live with less expenses. Having said that, I'll take off my badge and talk as a member of a faith community. So this is not me from Landis Communities talking. This is Larry, a member of a local faith community. I personally am disappointed that my own faith tradition is not doing more to say this is not going to end well. I believe that that's partly because of the division within my own faith tradition as to which is the direction the country should go. But there hasn't been much said. whether it's on immigration reform, whether it's on any of the other issues that directly affect providers of senior care. There's just nothing being said. And I lament that as a member of the faith community that comes from a tradition of caring. I mean, I mentioned at the start, I'm here because both of my parents felt enough of a call to service that they went away from their home communities to serve underserved communities in Western Colorado. We have a tradition of helping people, and we aren't, in my case, I don't see my faith tradition advocating as strongly as they might. And that bothers me. So now I'll put my badge back on and say that as an organization, we are trying to make our opinions known without alienating the very people that need to help us help others. So the perfect example is there's a town in Pennsylvania called Reading, Pennsylvania. It is a majority Latino community. It is very low income community. The state has said they want to put low income senior housing there that's well constructed and safe and not second rate in any way. We want to put it there, but to do that, we need PHFA dollars, which is low income housing tax credit dollars. That's the only way we can afford to build there. And so we don't want to put at risk the ability to help those low income seniors by being too loud. On the other hand, it's a big push and pull. But that's a very good question. Very you're very attuned to what that is, what's happening right now.
Well, that was a great answer. Very, very nuanced, and I think it is a reflection of a lot of people's concerns right now on a lot of different issues. Yeah, thank you. Especially,
and we think about it too. We go to congregations to ask for financial resources to help meet our budget. If it's known that we're advocating a certain political bent, we put at risk those things, and that's one of those questions that communicators and development folks or advancement folks are always working at that intersection, right? How do you call it out for what it is, but also recognize that if you call it out too loudly, you may have some unintended consequences.
thank you.
Larry, a question, and I think I got the stats right. I jotted them down. I think you said 1/3 of 70-year-olds have limitations and half of 80-year-olds. Is that pretty consistent, or is that is that increasing?
It's pretty consistent, but the population of 80 something is rising. So in real numbers, it's rising. So the percentage isn't necessarily changing. It's just that the sheer volume of people who are turning 80 is starting to rise significantly. And so, using my 1964 suburb as an example, I've been there since 2003, and I'm the third newest person in the whole cul-de-sac, which means that most of the people moved in the 1970s and are now in their late 70s, early 80s. And that's what we're seeing. One has COPD, one is in a wheelchair, one is not driving anymore. It is those kind of things. And I don't have them in front of me, but the reality of the cost to federal budgets for seniors who are lonely and become depressed is just astronomical. The cost to the taxpayer, if you will, that's a huge expense, and so that's also included in that total of people who end up suffering from extreme loneliness and depression because they can't get out anymore, and so that would be a part of that number.
And it's rather frightening that, as you said, there's not going to be enough caregivers for folks that need care.
Technology will help. There are people that are creating technology that can help track activities of daily living. So you don't have to send a nurse to a house to make sure someone used the toilet. The toilet will tell you somebody used the toilet. The bed will tell you what time they woke up. The refrigerator will tell you when it was open. But you have to have a human component to the touch. I know there's a person in our neighborhood who the most conversation they have in a day is when the Meals on Wheels person shows up.
I was gonna, not sure what to say. Yeah, I like technology, but not enough to sacrifice relationships that people need to thrive. You don't thrive on technology alone. So we're at time. I just I want to say that there were a couple slides where you had some summary slides, like the what can be done with 4 items. Adapting congregational life had 3 points on it. You had a great slide with examples. Also, because we are communicators and marketing is part of what we do, is I want to agree with you, even though I think you were sort of hesitant, that I think marketing is an appropriate word to use. And it's important because that's how we kind of connect the dots. Other thing I want to say that really got my attention, I think is important, and this stems also because I do research. When you said to stop and listen, to me, this translates into research. Talk to your audience, talk to your members, talk to your community. The information you get from them is like pure gold because they're literally telling you what they want. And if possible, if you can give it to them, I think that some things can happen and be turned around and help people. So I think there are a lot of things, and maybe it's just a new way of thinking, like you said, even about how to use your space and welcoming new ideas.
I think that's very true. And one of the tools that we use now that we didn't have then is very simple surveys on SurveyMonkey. You can create, even using the free version, a very simple survey that you can send out to your members, you can send to neighbors, you can find all sorts of email lists that you can send it to. And if you pair that with the research of data that you probably can get from your county office of aging or whatever that source is, you begin to create an overlay of what is the community around the house of worship. Or, if you take the footprint of where your members live, in that footprint, what are the demographics that we need to be paying attention to? Because it may or may not be the single family household with 2 kids and a dog. It may be much more likely to be people that live by themselves in a house that they have paid off. But what do they do when they can't be safely by themselves anymore?
Right. Okay. Like I said, we're at time. I want to respect everybody's time. Does anybody have any final questions?
No
Jenny,
question.
do you have?
Say thank you. Just to say thank you, Larry.
Yes,
Yeah, I
thank
hope it
you.
was helpful. Jenny has my contact information
Greater
with this.
information.
I would be very happy to engage anyone in a conversation. If you're ever in Lancaster and want to see something other than the Amish, you can come and see our buildings and see how we have tried to find creative new ways to market to both people within our faith community and beyond.
Great information for our elderly.
All righty. Jenny, do you have any final comments? I don't want to put you on the spot. I want to offer up the opportunity.
Just know that it will be posted. I'll take the recording and have it up within a few days or a day. And if you need to come back and revisit, or if you need to share that, thank you, Larry, for allowing us to do that.
You bet.
Appreciate that.
I'm happy to talk to any of you anytime. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Have a
Thank
good
you
one.
so much.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.